All right. So we're going to turn to Chris McMurray. Our next session is all about the work of the EduJedi Leadership Society. But before I bring him in, so you can turn your camera on, Chris, if you want to, but you don't have to. I want to run through really quick kind of the latest data, because I promised Colorado this, from the most recent survey. So this was the data take for in terms of demographics, pretty much split between the administrative ranks and the teachers. From the earlier survey, actually, the spend increase in the last year was 7.5 billion. It was the biggest jump in history. Everybody was buying Chromebooks. Everybody was buying digital curriculum of all forms and shapes and sizes, trying to do a little bit of network patching. Now they're getting serious this year about real networks. Hardware spend up by 4.5 billion. Across K-12. We're expecting that to kick up again another 400 million, could be a lot more. The CARES Act 2 was way bigger than we thought. But that's not even in play yet so far. People are still spending out CARES Act 1. And CARES Act 2 is 4 times the size for K-12 money. So pretty excited what that's going to mean for real transformation. In digital curriculum spend, up by 2.1 billion last year, will uptick again this year by 2 billion. Paper resources spend will be down again. It was down by $1 billion last year. It'll be down again, but not by as much. There's still a lot of dependency on paper. There needs to be, there's just some things you got to do. In terms of consumer comparison, this was the scary part. K-12 education in 2021 is only at 13.1 billion. Yeah, it jumped up. But the consumer behavior at the start of the quarantine was unbelievable, like uptick in only a couple of months of another extra billion. And it was waning. In other words, K-12 was starting to catch up in their sophistication of use of software and professional grade stuff. All of a sudden, the consumers are like, well, school's out. I got to get my kid to learn something. And look, there's this math game over here, and there's this over there, and I can buy a subscription over here to this. So that spend accelerated, and it's still overtaking now what K-12 is doing. This is telling you something really important. Consumers, America is expecting professional grade stuff. And so when we talk about what's really expected of you in terms of the premium navigation ease and the animation and the things that are truly interactive, it's one of the reasons we were just showing you all the programs that are new on the scene that we showed you. They're pieces of this whole puzzle. So this was the January study, kind of shocking, some of the data we took out of it. 35% of students were not showing up online during quarantines. I know some schools are back now, still kind of a problem. 15% of the students aren't even getting the right materials half the time, which is a function of your navigational systems, your learning management systems, and how you're organizing your operations. Students who can't easily navigate. Of course, it was a shock to their system. 34% can't easily navigate. Students who have opted out. This is the big shocker, 15%. We were already at huge portions of the student population leaving for private school charters or homeschooling. We kicked up another 15% during the pandemic. This is now putting us at somewhere between 33.6 and 42% of the United States population has left traditional public. This is telling you a lot about what they're wanting in structure and more flexibility and true personalization. So students who have achievement losses, this is the killer. 51% of students have achievement loss nationwide. Teachers who can't easily navigate and use online systems or apps and need more training, 30%, we're still there. That'll probably continue forever because we keep loading more on. Unable to easily personalize learning for students in the changed conditions. 47% of teachers are admitting they can't really personalize. They're just too busy scrambling. And then teachers who are overly sidetracked into the repetitive digital tasks of distributing and collecting assignments, resources, or communications. These are the guys that only use Google, not that Google's horrible or anything, but the sort of manual digital stuff. A lot of work for teachers, and they get easily sidetracked into all that little minutia. And then the percentage of teachers who are feeling overwhelmed, 74%. It's not good for the health of the teachers. So this is why we're doing what we're talking about today. All right, so over to you, Chris. I'm going to pass you the mouse.
Me, the mouse control. Perfect.
Yeah.
Happy Wednesday, folks.
Yeah.
This is what a great segue. So actually, what all of that data to me, it speaks directly to some of the conversation that we're about to have relative to sophistication, because you could point back to, I would venture to guess that you could point back to some of those results and find that at the root there are low sophistication resources being used, and that's kind of what we're going to go through today a little bit of. We have some time, so we're going to take a sort of a quick trip through the EduJedi dictionary. We're going to look at some standards for educators and for students, for learners, and we're going to look at a model that can be used to start to design learning experiences that help to avoid a lot of those gaps. And so those gaps being engagement gaps. They might be a learning loss, which is sort of a big buzzword right now. And so all of those things, including the teacher burnout, we're going to talk about some of that stuff and how to get some time back. So really, this is really a discussion about how to choose and use resources and how to understand what those resources are, so that when you are selecting things like a learning object repository, you're looking for certain characteristics of those resources that are going to help you to get time back as a teacher. And so I was a teacher for many years. I taught fourth and fifth grade. I was an instructional coach. I was a principal. I was a chief academic officer. And so all of these things are near and dear to my heart. They're also sort of miraculous in that now we have the technology to actually personalize. We can actually do that. And that has always been the goal, and it continues to be. So so we're going to hop in today, and okay, there we go. Oh, there's me. Kids looking at small devices with question mark. So we're going to jump in today at this point, and it's interesting that we were talking about sophistication and learning objects and things like that in the earlier part of today, because this is actually an important piece that we want to make sure that you understand, and that is part of your thinking and understanding. So there's going to be 3 layers to this, and I'll start here. So this is really something that was developed by the Learning Council in conjunction with a lot of educators across the country, somewhere around 2015, and it really describes the sophistication levels of various learning objects. And so you could imagine that from left to right, you're going from sort of low sophistication to high sophistication on the other side. And then at the top, you see some arrows pointing in either direction. And the indication there is that the lower the sophistication, the more instructional planning or prep time you might be required. And then as you go to more sophisticated courseware types of resources, then you're using the automation. And this is important because we're talking about buying back time, but at the same time creating engaging and meaningful learning experiences. So you start at the bottom over there. This is the digital document end of things. It's the Word doc, it's the Google Doc. It lives by itself. It sort of doesn't interact. It's not very social. It doesn't interact with other resources. It's not built into a system. It doesn't give you any feedback. It just is, right? It's fairly static. It's probably great information, but it's static. It doesn't do much, if anything. And then you move up the sophistication ladder into single loop animations, and these might be, for example, something is zooming in from the left-hand side on a PowerPoint slide, for example, or it's dissolving in and something appears. It's sort of it's very rudimentary animation, but it's moving up the scale from a static Word doc, and it is creating a little bit of engagement. It has some interest until you move up into the video range, and this is where I think somebody had mentioned in one of the previous sessions, recording a video to help students understand a concept or some ideas. And this is where all of a sudden the end user has the ability to modulate and navigate through an experience. So you record a video as a teacher, it's about whatever, biology, and all of a sudden now the student can, based on what they need in terms of using this information, they can pause, stop, rewind, fast forward, replay, and then all of a sudden in a more active way, they're able to interact with the information, and that's more sophistication. So that also then frees you up as a teacher from from having to constantly being on the side and answering questions or representing or adding more information because it's right there and the learner can navigate around it. And then we move up into the collection range. And so collections are really taking all of the things that are searchable, and they're layered in with lenses of standards, and there's technology standards being considered, and there's the ability to navigate through a collection of items, and they're relatively contextualized, right? So they all have some form of connectivity with each other. They're built into a system. You have a dashboard. The learning object repository types of things live within that category. And that's great because guess who doesn't have to go find all those things and vet every one of them? The teacher doesn't, right? And so you just get to go use them, and you get to create your playlist, and then it's very effective for the learner as well. So that there's a line there, right? So we're teetering over into the more automated learning category. And that's a distinctive sort of a line to make. It's important to understand where we're heading, because as soon as we tiptoe over that line into the feedback category, the feedback category is also actually the first time that a learning object is going to start interacting and causing interaction with the learner and the system. And this is good. This is important because all of a sudden the learner is getting feedback from the resource based on their input. It's answering questions. It's allowing the student or the learner to ask questions, and all of a sudden the machine is working with the student or with the learner, which frees up the teacher to do more human things. Right? We've had conversations about SEL. All those things are very important. The relationships, yes, are important, and so how do we put more humanity back into the activity, into the job? We use more sophisticated tools, and so the feedback level is the first time that you start to see the ability to navigate and interact, which then goes up into coding. And this is not pro level coding. This is definitely amateur coding, but this would be, for example, a teacher coded WordPress site. It creates a world where the learner can navigate through things and get information that they need and start putting things together and building their understanding. And that's another sophistication level. But again, it creates more time, right? We're increasing teacher time available to do things by moving up the sophistication scale. And then we jump into that top level, which is the courseware level. And this is the highly designed, professionally coded resource level. And this is where the algorithms live. And this is where AI lives and machine learning, and there's adaptive nature and built into resources. And there's predictive ability designed into those resources. And so this is important to understand, because the more of those you use on the right-hand side, the more time you're going to get back, and the easier it is to design with those higher experiential resources. So put that into your mind as we move into the next slide here. So as you move in your understanding of how to characterize a resource, it's important to also think about the atomization or the granularity of those. And so we just heard from a number of resources that address the granularity of things and then help you to move around and with them. And so this is actually a scale of that type to describe that granularity. And it's not new. It came out in a white paper report that you can see in the thumbnail there. You can download it. Definitely take a look at it. It's good information, especially now as we're moving into almost a forced digital transformation. It's important to get as much information as you possibly can and bounce it around in your system. So at the very top of this graphic, you'll see the sort of the amateur authorware sort of a level, right? And so we're moving from very atomized or granular types of resources into much more aggregated resources. So at the concept level, this is like it's like a paragraph of text, right? It could be an excerpt from a larger article or a textbook. It could be something that you Googled and found online. And again, it lives in isolation. It doesn't have context. It's not placed into a larger collection. It just is. And that means you have to do something with it. You have to create the context and the connectivity for that particular piece of information. Means work, right? Means time. And then we move up into contextualized levels, and we're becoming more aggregated as we go. And so these are bits and pieces of information and things that are now all of a sudden given context around a larger concept or a larger body of work. It could be again biology. It could be a math concept. And so that allows each one of those things that used to be discrete to now suddenly help to create meaning in the mind of the learner, and it gives them something to hang on to that's a little bit more concrete. And then we move up into courses and ebooks, and these are things that teachers can make, right? I've made them before. A lot of people have, and they are the aggregated version of those things, and they all of a sudden have purpose, right? So the ebook puts all that stuff that is now contextualized and goes from the concept into something that has that is much more whole and then palatable and movable, right? It's portable. You can take it somewhere. You can flip through it and go forward and aft and things like that. So that's all the sort of amateur authorware, and then we jump over into professionally coded resources, which then essentially run from short form to long form. Short form being the applet or app that is discrete in the same way that the concept level of the content would be. The applet or app is really the one math app that has one level. It has a singular focus or purpose, and that's all it does. And it's not connected to any other system. It doesn't have context. It doesn't allow the user to move beyond it into something else. It just does what it does, and it does that well. But again, it's standalone. And so as a user, I'm going to have to go somewhere else to get to the next thing. And as a builder or a designer of the experience, I'm going to have to cause someone to go somewhere else if I'm only using that short form type of a resource. So you move up into courses and courseware. And this is aggregating and automating things, and it's helping to create an experience and allow users to move through that experience and individualize at the very least, but hopefully then personalize as the experience is designed. And then we move into the collection level. And this is, again, similar to the last slide that we looked at in terms of sophistication. This is where AI is being used, right? This is where all the learning engines and predictive types of functions are being leveraged, so that all of a sudden the machine is learning about me as we go, and is able then to direct me in terms of what resources I can choose within that ecosystem that are going to help me to understand. So that's an important scale to understand and begin to internalize, because as we go out into the world and begin to select resources for our systems to put into the ecosystem, it's important that we are clear on all those things. So the next slide actually takes all of that, right, and all of what we've been talking about in terms of digital load, right, and places it into a descriptor. And so until a few years ago, several years ago, before the pandemic, and we've been talking about this for more than 10 years, as technology advanced and became much more commonplace in schools, the systems were just buying things, and one-to-one came along, and people were just buying up apps, and they'd throw them into the ecosystem, and pretty soon it looked like a zoo over there. And there's a ton of stuff out there, and there still is. And that was what was happening, is that the teachers in the field were starting to experience this fatigue and this load, and yet it wasn't clearly identified yet what that load might have been. Oops, oh, yikes! Skipping ahead, can't skip that. so the Learning Council did some stepping back at that point and said, okay, yeah, we've been talking about the technology, we've been talking about the teaching and learning, and the sort of the confluence of those things, but how do we describe this feeling that is sort of niggling in the back of people's minds, and it's causing teacher fatigue? And it was identified then through some research that actually what's happening is that we had inadvertently placed this additional digital load on top of the system, and the system wasn't created for it, and it wasn't prepared. And so identifying the problem is the first step to actually correcting that. And so this is pivotal, because what was identified as the missing piece was actually something that exists out in the non-education world, and that is logistics, right, and routing. And so what we needed was a way for learners and learning experience designers to navigate the field of all of this stuff, be able to use it and build with it like Lego, and be able to figuratively dump the system out, dump out the Legos onto the table, and then build something that was meaningful and usable, so that people could start to move forward and take some of the load off. But it also means that if we have a load, we should be relying on technology to take some of that off, right? The more automation we use, and the more connectivity we have between learning objects, the lighter the load gets, because all of a sudden technology, which was created to help us do the human parts better, we've allowed the technology to help us do that, and that's important. And so as you start thinking about, wow, how do I get around all of this stuff, and how do I identify what school A and school B are buying? I think LeiLani brought it up in terms of being prescriptive. And yes, the answer is yes, you do have to start being more prescriptive, because you cannot have a zoo. You can't have everyone buying up whatever app just happens to pop up to serve a unique need, because then all of a sudden you've created an equity issue, and you've created mud in your system, and maybe inadvertently turning people away from the design that you've created. So that's an important highlight to make, because it does speak to letting technology do what technology does best, right? So that we can be humans. So place that in the back of your mind, and I'm going to layer on top of it some information about the EduJedi dictionary. If you haven't gotten this yet, definitely go get it. It's linkable, and it's on the Learning Council site. If you can't find it anywhere else, definitely get this. And here's why, right? And so as a chief academic officer, I was in an arranged marriage with my chief information officer, and we entered the system at the same time, and we were informed that we should be walking arm in arm through this work, which meant that I could lean on him when I didn't understand some stuff, and he could lean on me when I started when he needed teaching and learning types of information and knowledge, and ultimately we started to sound alike. And that's a transformational step within an organization that helps things to succeed, because when you're going down the digital transformation path, those two people and the departments that they work within, those two have to be arm in arm, and they've got to be parallel and moving at the same time, and talking the same talk and walking the same walk. And so the dictionary, a great thing, because you can put it up between you and go, okay, I don't understand this, could you help me with that? And then all of a sudden it creates common vocabulary, and then we are somewhere, right? Then, because we're using common definitions for things. So I'm going to go through some of the categories and give you a sort of a brief sort of a peek into what each of those categories is about, and then I'll show you some examples, and then you can peruse those this weekend when you need some light beating. So actions really talks about, this category really talks about the functions of the code that do things, right? It's all of the what's written into the zeros and ones. Usually it's discrete. It's sort of without involvement from other processes. It's just the code. It's the code that causes an app to do a thing. That's covered in there. The design category really talks about aesthetics or dressing or navigation or interoperability, things like user onboarding, options for accessibility, engagement strategies, all those things that are design-y is covered in there. Controls is actually a very, it's an important characteristic to understand, and it goes along with the next category, number 4, which is customization. But the controls really talks about aspects and definitions surrounding administrative capabilities, and those are important when you start thinking about personalization and individualization. Those are important definitions to understand. Customization is also tied to that, right? And this is really functions within a learning object that support decisions to match the needs of the individual learners. So when we talk about individualization and personalization, individualization refers to decisions that the educators are making for the learners, and personalization refers to models where learners are given the option and the agency to decide what methods and resources work best for them to suit their needs, and then they can take action on those. So it's also important that we draw a line and say, this is what, when we say personalization, this is what we mean. Because there are a lot of instances where sometimes you hear the word personalization, and especially in systems that aren't purposefully moving toward that. The image in people's mind when you say that is a jailbreak, or all of a sudden the monkeys were let loose in the zoo and they're running amok. And so it's scary. It can be scary until you define it, right? And then start moving forward with a clear definition. In the instruction category talks about what capabilities for lesson giving exist within a resource, right? So it talks about content delivery, tutoring, feedback, things like that support the student's understanding of content or concepts, and that's covered in there. It's important to understand that what instructional qualities or characteristics exist in the resources that you're vetting or selecting. And that's because what you want to be able to do is move higher in the sophistication scale, and having resources that are higher on the instruction scale also means that they're higher on the sophistication scale. So that's an important consideration when you're moving things into your ecosystem. The mechanisms really talk about digital structures, right? So these are things that create a series of steps, series of actions. They're built into a small system. They're meant to work in sequences or loops, and so that's a function of the learning object. Business model is actually something that is probably more important than one might imagine, or that a lot of folks really consider. And this is for example freemium, right? We know that freemium is not free. It actually isn't. And so somebody's getting the money somewhere, right? And so business model, think about that. There's information in the dictionary about that, and it's relative to hostile characteristics, that 8th category. And these are intentionally intrusive characteristics of a resource, right? It pops something up in your face and causes you to make a decision about something that isn't related to your learning experience. It's, hey, let's upgrade to premium, you 5th grader. So that's important to understand. It's critical that you know if your resources have hostile characteristics or not. And then the final category is really just basics and not so basics. It's terms and ideas that are important to understand. And so those are the categories. Definitely lots more information within there, but I'll share a few examples. This is another one where when I see this, and if you can see the screen, there's some language in here that starts to look like tech speak to me, and so this is where I would lean over and talk to my compatriot at the IT side and say, what are we talking about? But as an academic person, as a chief academic officer, yeah, I do need to know what trigger procedures are. I actually do. So there's the definition. It gives you an example of it on the right-hand side, right? It's the point in a system that once a user comes to it, the system automatically performs and does a new thing via that trigger, right? It's input. It's moving up that sophistication scale. It's in that feedback, highly designed software, courseware sort of level. Awesome. Good to know. Gating. Gating is a gaming concept, and this is where when we talk about gamifying, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're traipsing through a world. It means that we're actually creating an experience, but we're using things like gating to help the users move, and the learners move within their experience, and either accelerate or decelerate or move laterally. And the ability to take the ceiling off of an experience, right? Set the floor high and take the ceiling off and allow lateral connectivity. This is a good example of what you can do. And if your resource allows gating, then does it allow ungating? Because then if you're going to take the ceiling off and allow users to keep going, you have to have the ability to ungate. And so you want to understand what gating is, right? It's a mechanism, and we talked about that. Hey, here's hostile characteristics again. Yeah, this is the pop-up that says, hey, all you fifth graders, you should upgrade to premium. And you didn't really mean for that to be part of their experience. And yet, how do you get them back out of the rabbit hole after they start clicking? And we've all seen this happen in a classroom where the teacher has cleverly designed an experience. It uses a couple of resources, maybe one in particular. Maybe that resource is finite in its use because we hadn't considered the business model before. And now all of a sudden, as students get to a certain point in the utility of that resource, boom, something pops up and it sends them off in another direction. And then how do you get them back? It's hard. And then here we go with an unfavorable experience, right? We could have avoided that had we known about the hostile characteristics a little bit. Modal, this is a great example. This one is good to include because it really highlights a lot of the sophistication that we were talking about, right? This is some of the feedback loop level of things, and this is where the dialogue pops up, makes you enter causes you to enter some information, answer some questions, do some things, and then hit OK, submit, go, and then it takes you down a slightly different path or gives you different resources or some options to work with. And again, moving toward individualization and personalization, these types of characteristics and resources are going to help you do that. It takes some of the load off, takes some load off your shoulders, and that's a good thing. Nesting, we talked. I think somebody was bringing up ease of use, and that's super important, right? And we all know that if we, great example. I happen to have the displeasure of walking through a telephone calling tree to get a question answered. It was a nightmare, and I hung up because I didn't get what I needed. And so the same way, nesting structures within resources or even within your own curated resources is important to understand. How easy is it to get the information that I need as an end user? Because if it's hard, I'm done, I'm out, I'm tapping out, and you won't get me back in there because it's going to be hard for me to be convinced that it's going to be better next time. So important to understand, and that's in the dictionary. It's right there. So from there, I'm gonna jump into some standards. The standards for administrators and teachers and learners were developed by the EduJedi in conjunction with a lot of educators across the country. A lot of the partner districts put some time and effort into these, and they're evolving, right? They're organic, and what we believe we have created, however, is a different set of standards. And you always think, oh my gosh, another set of standards. What if it's not ISTE? It's whatever. Layer on one more, bring it. Let's do that. These are a little different, right? And so these are actually speaking to responsibility relative to digital transformation and use of systems. So if you look at this slide, this is for administrators, new professional responsibilities for selection and management of digital curriculum and systems. As a chief academic officer, yes, I do have responsibility for that. Did I before? Maybe not, or maybe I did and I didn't realize it. So here's 3 examples, and I'm just going to throw these out there. I'll lob them out there, and then hopefully that spurs some additional conversation. But here it is. The institution weighs the impact of the resource for actual cost, right? We talked about it before. Free isn't free. But in a similar way that paper resources might cause you to have a consumable purchase that you maybe didn't think about in your 5-year budget, There's digital resources that have similar types of extended costs possibly, and you need to know that, and you need to know the licensing. You need to understand the DSA, right? You can't just take the DSA and toss it over at your legal team if you have one and say, hey, figure this out and then let me know. That doesn't happen. It can't happen. You have to understand the language within there because it's your job as the administrator. Whether you're a central office or whether you're a building administrator, you have some responsibility there. You also have responsibility for progressively working toward full individualization and personalization, right? And so if you're not already there, get there, because that's what has to happen. And now we have the technology tools available to help with that and to make it possible. And there are partners who are already doing it that you can align with and say, hey, we want to look over your shoulder. We want to know what the pain points were in year 2. We want to know where you are in year 10. And guess what? We know who those people are. And luckily, they're all working arm in arm with the Learning Council. So it's great that you're here, because this is where you get to pick people's brains and hear ideas and bounce things off. But you have that responsibility. That's relatively new, right? You also have responsibility for moving toward digital pathway workflow types of experiences, and that's another important move that maybe some people aren't really thinking through at this point. But you know what? It's time. It's time. Standards for teachers. These are in layers, right? So the responsibilities here are for composition in systems. You're responsible for learning design, and you're responsible for student oversight. Those things aren't brand new, but learning design is more specific to building or planning for learning versus planning for teaching. And we'll go over some of that a little bit. That's included in the model that we'll talk about briefly. And then standards for students. This is also another layer, but this is what is your responsibility as a learner for your user experience, right? And what agency do you have and should be able to exercise in navigating through a learning experience and platforms, and knowing whether resources are right for you, and being able to choose those. Being able to advocate for your decisions and for your needs, and actually starting from a strong learner identity, moving to exercising student agency, and that's where we start to move into the personalization realm. So those are three. Just glancing over the top of those. Those are three of the big ideas on these standards, and there's, as you read through them in the dictionary, you'll see those sort of fleshed out a little bit more. But I strongly encourage you to take a look at these and start layering them up against what it is that you're currently doing, and then start asking that hard question: Am I actually taking this responsibility, because it is my job? And if I'm not, let's sit down at the table and starting with that top level admin, what do we expect and what are we doing? Because we do need to know. And so thankfully this new set of standards really helps. Wish that I could have had this many years ago, and now it's here. So I want to jump into the model just a little bit, and I had sort of previewed that in a way. The model the model that we've been working with for some time. I see that there's a comment there from Teresa. Perfect. Never too late. You bet. Absolutely. Let's just get started. Let's do it. Start from today. So there's a lot of models, right? And so Addie's model has been around, and it's the one referenced here. But there's a number of them that are used to design learning and things like that, right? So educational experiences, kind of. And so Addie's is what, 45 years old. It's fine, right? It's great, except that it's teacher centric. And what we're talking about as we move into personalization is learner centric, right? So you should be spending your time designing a learning experience versus prepping for teaching. And so the Addie's model really starts to poke at that, right? It actually begins with a teacher-centric approach, and so it's talking about class structure and sort of steps, and it sounds very rigid and very industrial, and that's because that's where it came from. And so if you use Addie's model to design experiences, that's how you're going to start. That's what it's going to feel like, right? What you put in is what you're going to get out. And so the EduJedi model is different, right? It takes a look at how our learning experience is designed, and what are the two sort of parallel tracks that we could be thinking about that design existing. And so if you look at the EduJedi model down there, there's the workflow logistics design row, and then there's the discovery design row. And so the workflow logistics design is really talking about how do we help create an experience that is easily navigable, that leverages technology, so that the learners and the teachers are intersecting when they need to, and they're not tied to seat time. It isn't about that, and it can't be, right? Seat time's done. Seat time, if the systems that you're working within are hyper focused on seat time, it's time to move, time to get off that one. The other row beneath that is the discovery design, right? And the discovery design is how are we creating experiences that allow student agency, or build student agency even better, and then allow the students to go experience and discover. And so it's definitely designed to support the creation of personalized learning experiences, and you have to be able to identify what those elements are within a model, and then start designing with it. One of the things that we're going to be working with teachers and administrators on here in the coming year and beyond is really getting some teacher designed experiences using the model as examples that we can start to share across the country, and help people to design with this, right? Because it's one thing to have a model, but if you can't do anything with it, then of course you're gonna kick it to the curb, and no thanks. Yeah, thanks. I'll just go back to what's comfortable, and then we haven't moved forward. I think somebody this morning was talking about hoping that we don't go back to the worksheets in the way that we were. And I apologize for not noting exactly who that was, but that's right. The way that we get back to that is by not using a new model for learning design. And so none of us want that. We've gotten this far. So now going backwards, that's not an option. We can't do that. We know better. So let's not, okay? Yeah, let's just not. So here's some differences, and I'll highlight just a few between the models.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
If you go to the next slide, I surprised you with an example.
Oh, hey, nice, fantastic. Okay, good.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah. So the example here, I was just mentioning that. Thanks for the surprise.
Yeah.
But if you look at this and you think about the little boxes along those two, the workflow and the discovery design, you can see where some of those things are starting to manifest, right? So for example, you go into the courseware to select the right modules and figure out how to sequence all the items so that students can self-navigate the path until a group lecture and discussion moment, right? We talked about uncoupling from seat time, and that we were pointing people to intersections, right? So that the resource and the end user are coming together at the point at which they need to go, and this is a great example of that. And so this is the kind of thing that we're going to be working with teachers and administrators to come up with, so that you can start to go, oh yeah, okay, I see what that means. And then it's not quite so nebulous, and then you can actually go try it, and then the more we try, then the better we get, and then the more we learn. And so this is a great example. This is perfect. Thank you, Lonnie, for putting that up.
Yeah, I'll just pipe in and sort of walk people through this. So
yep.
The workflow logistics design, that's what this sample is. So it's, it's a pretend math lesson. So when the teacher's scoping, doing the first step, teacher's going to check that district's pacing for what their objectives are. So they find out they have 2 standards to teach in this particular lesson regarding fractions. Of course, math fractions are my favorite things to talk about. Plus a district requirement to use some purchased courseware. Okay, so let's say, they've got Safari Matage, they've got maybe Achieve 3000, and they're going to route kids through Safari into the Achieve, or maybe they have a single sign-on from ClassLink, right? So that courseware is now anchoring the lesson plan. So a teacher checks that out. They're like, okay, and I got to do a final assessment. So they make note of that. Now they're going to idea and map, idea curate. So they realize 50% of their students are remote. Okay, so maybe seat time is remote time, and maybe the state's still allowing that. So they have the idea to also do some sort of hands-on experiment, because they got to get kids a little bit more active, no like just sit and get. So they say to the kids, you're at home, we're going to have you cut up a fruit or vegetable and label the fractional parts, and then we're going to video it. You're going to share it on video. Like, is this a quarter of the carrot? So there's little things like that teachers will do, right? And you curate a couple of other resources. One's maybe in an animated video. Now you got all your piled stuff that you're going to do. Now you design by making sure you check your courseware, which is going to do some automated fractions work, like Achieve can do, or Mind Research can do. And then you're going to go, okay, it's module 3, and then da-da-da. So then when you implement, you go step 1, do this, log in and do this, your modules, and make sure all your access is managed. Like, you have to make sure your roster is in that piece of courseware. Then they have another step of some reading, and another step is to do send back some sentences, explaining what a fraction is, so the teacher knows they're on the right page. And then their live teaching moment happens. Now, so that's the come together moment. And then they introduce the hands-on project and the assessment. So they've now, step 5, they're tagging the steps with when the live moment is. This is where the auto calendaring, auto bring together the cohort comes in. So the teacher set it up so like the first 10 kids to make it to this point, they made it through the reading, they made it through the modules, they sent back their sentences. Then they're the first ones in the cohort. As soon as the cohort is made, like all kids have made it to that point, it triggers the calendar and secures a classroom. And the classroom, maybe some kids are coming in via video remotely, and some kids are live on campus. This is the real melding of logistics with pace. And it's a different mentality than most districts and schools and teachers are approaching it. And then you have the termination and continuance end, where maybe that's the end of the lesson, and now you trigger the next lesson set, which is different than triggering a model. Like you were talking about triggers in software, Chris. This would be at the LMS level. So next lesson auto triggered. So you're not waiting around as a student who's pacing quickly for the teacher every single time. This is where now we're perfecting the teaching to be the human interface when needed, but they're not doing all the minutia of gating, ungating, who's in what, is the roster correct, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, so that's the briefing on that. And really, when I've listened to instructors talk about what they're doing with their lesson planning now, they're not realizing at the management level the traffic pattern on the individual teachers for how much goes on in the distribution of what digital where, navigate here, here's the link to go there, now you got to log in over here. And it's forcing whole group on everybody, and it's reducing personalization. Mm-hmm. Because of the traffic in digital, which is actually more traffic to take care of. I mean, we all know how much email is on us. But when you add in chat hitting you and dashboards hitting you from 16 different pieces of courseware and your repositories and everything else, it's a lot, and it's not really seen. So what this is looking at is, how do you set your path your paths, and then the tweaking can still occur. The direct instruction can still occur, but you're a little bit more prescriptive in terms of how you're going to personalize.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great, it's a great characterization. And I think, the key is using more sophisticated resources, because, you could have, which is sort of why we looked at that scale, a little bit earlier. You could have a ton of those low sophistication resources. And if you're trying to do this, it's going to be a nightmare, and probably not even possible. And so, that's a great connection for sure.
Yeah, I honestly think, Chris, that the reason that we've been hearing for the last year that people were getting Zoom fatigue is because most places it was too much to confront the lesson sequencing digitally and the distribution of digital log in here, log in there,
Mm-hmm.
that people were resorting back to what they knew, which was, teachers were just going to video teach.
Yep. Which is really just a digitization of what they probably did in the classroom, which also wasn't right. If we go there, I wouldn't want a lecture style to be going on in any of my schools. And so yeah, it's and I think that's actually that's a mindset shift that is actually really kind of hard to make for some folks, right? You have to get to put your brain around all of a sudden moving in a digital three-dimensional space is sometimes a bit of a leap, and it's a leap of faith. And I've seen a lot of educators get to the point they're on the precipice of jumping in, and they go, oh my gosh, no, I can't. Nope, I'm out. I'm going back. I'm going to go back to what I did, and I'll be comfortable there. And that's an unfortunate place to be, I think.
Yeah. I think what we're doing here is we're not doing something that maybe the more advanced learning management systems don't already know. They just haven't codified how they have a new design thing.
Right.
It just is what they're doing in their systems.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really only teaching a teacher the think through planning in order to build in an LMS. Yeah.
Right. And that's a gap, actually. And so you have to actually understand how the learner is going to navigate the experience you designed, regardless of the system, right? If you have a more sophisticated LMS and you have the lore, and you're using Safari Montage and resources like that are going to help you along. If you don't understand this, however, then transferring that into an LMS is going to be hard. You have to have this in your brain, and you have to understand how to manipulate that, and how it's actually going to occur, before you can use it in a tool. Otherwise you're jumping into it and assuming that the tool is going to do it for you, and they don't. They don't. You have to have the design.
Yeah, and it's all about directing attention. So it's moving from that directing attention in the classroom, which, that was not hard because all the little humans are in front of you, right? And you're going, hey, stop passing notes in the back there and do this. And like, you can see who's paying attention. Even when you're in small groups in the room, you can see who's working. But when you're in digital, now you're having direct attention through electronic pathways. And if your directionality, if you're trying to do it through, the teacher says what the next link is, the teacher says what the next thing to do is, the teacher says, I'll respond to each and every one of your individual emails. Wow.
No.
So the traffic pattern is really being able to visualize the navigational motion of the learning. And that's what we're saying here is the missing ingredient to full digital transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I was talking to a colleague, and we were drawing a parallel between some of these ideas and what we did as teachers in the day, right? Before all of the technology was there was some technology, but you're really proficient, and good teachers and good learning designers would do that, right? They would walk through an experience that they built non-digitally, so that they knew that students could pace at their own, on their own, and have resources that were available for them to move to, and to be able to take the ceiling off, like I mentioned before. It's just that there wasn't technology, but boy, did we wish that we had it, and now we do. And so that thinking goes along with being a reflective learning designer, and actually having made that switch from I'm planning teaching to I'm planning learning. And that's if I could start somebody somewhere, that's where I would put the floor. Figure that out first quickly, and then let's talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll let you move on to your next slide.
Yeah. No, that's good. Great conversation. We could stay on that for a long time.
Yeah.
We could totally. And yep. And it would be a great conversation to engage all the others in too. So here's a few of the ways that the EduJedi model is different than Addie's, right? And so I'll just go through some of these bullets, and then we can talk about them a little bit later as we have some discussion time. But the EduJedi model detaches the assumptions of place and time and teacher centricity and prior structures, right? So as we move to personalization, we're really talking about time, space, pace, and place, and starting to deconstruct and think about those differently, right? No seat time. And so the EduJedi model, as you saw in that made up example, helps to move toward that, right? So the model also allows for goal setting that isn't restricted to course or class framework, right? So if you think about an experience being sort of organic and lateral, having to restrict yourself to a box which is a course or a box which is a class is counterintuitive to that model. It doesn't actually work, and so that's a distinction, right? Provides for automated synchronicity between standards and pacing guides and lessons, right? It starts to think about how, as LeiLani was going through that example, I've considered my pacing guides, I've considered my standard sets, I've identified my power standards, and now I'm automating the activity or the intersection between those, and how do I do that? And so the model, that's another difference. The other one that shows up in that discovery level or layer is problems being discovered or posed by students versus by teachers or educators. And we know that learning is sticky when that higher level of questioning is occurring, and that's built into the experience. The EduJedi model addresses that and can help you to move through and think through those things. And it really talks about or speaks to student agency in a way that other models don't. And
yeah. Can I just say something about that,
sure.
Chris?
Yeah.
Really, that's the old line library view of go figure something out.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of schools. I remember even when I was in high school, I was in one of the advanced classes in high school, and we were given the right to select a subject in a certain class. And then we even got to go to the college library and research it and come back. And at the end of the semester was like, write this brilliant paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Interview people for it and everything else. And I remember mine was on, the psychology of youngest students and how they learn. And I interviewed a local psychologist and everything. That has not really been unleashed yet in the digital world. There, just pretend like the Safari Montage's Glorious Repository or any one of these huge repositories, video repositories, go figure something out. Well, that's what they're already doing now on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Kids are teaching themselves to knit and build birdhouses and everything else. And so they're discovering themselves, their own interests, but most schools and most teachers are not thinking that way in digital. They've been in a mad scramble for a year anyway. A lot of the newer districts. So the thinking with this discovery-based model also is going to require you to think about your structure of digital content and not having it accessed by the identity of the teacher only for what you get to see, but just unleashing you as a student. And that's kind of new. And that's actually new in the software world too. Mm-hmm. I don't know very many systems that are built so that there can be student-based users. And so that's kind of a new one on the companies in this field as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that's it's the University of YouTube through which my son learned to fix his Volvo wagon. And right, and so you get to go to YouTube and pick from 50 teachers that are going to teach you something, and you get to choose the one that fits best for you. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Perfect. Excellent. So those are some of the ways that the model is different. And you know, as you start to experience that and explore that a little bit more, you'll start to see through our examples also what some of those differences are, and how to start leveraging the new model to build and design within your own system. So okay.
Yeah, I just put this slide in here, the next one. Yeah, so people can find if they want to copy paste into their own documents. I'm thinking that we might need to create PDFs of just the standards for people to grab them and be able to hand them out to everyone.
Yeah, for sure.
Because right now, you got to go through the whole dictionary. But you know, there's going to be meetings on this stuff all year, and anybody that wants to sign up for them. Basically, the purpose of all those meetings is to discuss every one of the standards, the parts of the dictionary and other things, as a learning mechanism for your own leadership and people you want to include into it, but also so that we can hear back from the market more leaders in schools saying, you're missing this standard, or I don't like the way this is worded. Could you do this a little bit differently? And in essence, these are all in draft by the EduJedi, and we want people to weigh in on them. But on these pages, you can download.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think I would definitely encourage anybody who even would have a little bit of time to give to some of these meetings. It's worth developing these with our colleagues across the country, because what we need is a unified set of design instructions and tools that we can use to create personalized learning experiences that leverage the technology. And we have an opportunity to do that, and this is a great central point from which to move in that direction. So highly recommend that. So we have a little bit of time, and having just sort of glanced over the top of a whole bunch of information, what I'd love to get some feedback on is from you in the field, because I'm always curious. I talk to a lot of educators, and I'm trying to understand what's going on and how are shifts happening within the industry. And so what I'd love to know now from you folks is what sorts of new responsibilities are emerging, and how are you in any one of these roles as a learning designer, right? Or a teacher, or as an administrator, as a learner, how are you responding to these sorts of things, and what are you seeing popping up in terms of changes in those responsibilities, right? Are there changes around learning design that you're experiencing given our current structure and model and configuration? Are there things going on that have shifted in user interface and experience, right? So how is, in parentheses here, how is tech and curriculum, how are those intersecting, and what is the experience? Because this is how we start to understand and can help more, and start to add things into the work of the EduJedi so that we're able to help folks move along. So hop into the chat for sure, and share some thinking around how responsibilities have changed, what's shifted, what's gotten better, what's maybe more difficult now, challenges, successes. Just want to hear all those.
Yeah, so I'm gonna make sure I turn my camera back on so we can chat together if no one else sort of weighs in. But you know, I think some of the companies that might be still online right now, if you could also sort of weigh in yourselves, and I took back remote from you, Chris, because otherwise I can't see the comments.
Yep.
So, you know, the issue that is out there right now is that we've all waded into some really deep considerations about what we're responsible for now on so many levels, and would like to hear what, you know, some of the educators and even some of the companies, because we mentioned that just planning with a lot of this technology. Some of the reps are out there like, hi, use this software, but they're not necessarily always thinking with like, the teacher has to tell you what module. And you're not the only software in the game. There's 7,000 other pieces that they're maybe dealing with in the course of the year. And have you talked to them as a rep about how you plan, set this as step 1, and then step 2, 3, 4 might be these other steps? Because it's the mixology of it all that's a new responsibility on the teacher. They have to look at their standards. They have to look at their weird schedule that's like morphing daily with, the next outbreak and the snow day and blah, blah. And then they have to figure out when people are doing what, when all their students are doing what, and they're all pacing differently. It's kind of wild. Yeah, Steve.
Yep.
Steve, do you want to unmute and say your piece? Go ahead.
So I mean, a lot of thoughts, and I love this conversation. But my first thought is how schools are moving away from the textbook, and in a lot of cases they were forced to because they couldn't get to the textbook. Right, if they're at home and the books are in the classroom, and we can even extend that in that I worked with a lot of teachers who were ELA teachers who were working with novels. They're teaching, Frankenstein or, whatever book they're reading, but the kids couldn't get to the books, and to force the kids to go out and buy a book during a pandemic, isn't fair. So kind of like that piece, but also connecting that to their requirement to meet learning standards. And so, we've got this new digital environment. And we need to be measured on, how we're meeting standards is just, to me, for teachers is very complex and a lot of stress that's involved there.
Yeah. And then, you bring in some high value professional grade software, and most of the times schools and districts are using it as remediation. It's remedial, it's extra, it's cute. And I've listened to teachers speak. I was in San Diego one year and a teacher came in and said they had some software, it might've been yours. And they had been using it just remedially. And then because they had to log in to see what the kids were doing, they're realizing what it would really be able to do for them. And they slid it into core. And now it anchored their teaching of that subject. And because of that, it freed up the teacher to be able to do other things around it. You know how like when we had textbooks only, teachers would roll in the old big fat TV, remember? And you'd watch something else for a little while when you weren't doing that other stuff. Now, if you're using this core courseware, you can still do that other stuff around there. But you're using it to do some of the heavy lift so that now you can personalize and go backwards and say, hey, this kid's really slow in this module and I got to go over there and handle them. And that's really what I think people want. What are you hearing, Steve, in terms of that? Because, a lot of people don't understand professional grade courseware.
Right. Yeah. I've always been fascinated by personalized learning and adaptive learning. And this is something that, it might come in different ways in the conversation on what teachers are looking for and what districts are looking for. But I hear it through that lens of every student is different, and we need to be able to specialize the education and specialize the content and the learning around each student's needs. So yeah, you might have, our application, which works great for those intervention students, the students that may be behind in their literacy or their math skills. And how do we accelerate that? And how do we catch them up? But what about the students who are ahead of grade level and they're bored by the content that they're being asked to read? How do we challenge them, and how do we give them a personalized look as well? There's no, you can look at 100 students and say, what's grade level? And 99 of the 100 are not going to be on grade level. They're going to be a little bit above, a little bit below, or a lot above, or a lot below. And so, how do we personalize learning to meet each student's needs?
Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting. And
Yeah.
so like in that example, the students actually shouldn't even be caused to read the same text, right? Because the task is not to read Island of the Blue Dolphins, right? That's not it. The task is to understand and be exposed to different types of literature and hone some understanding and thinking skills through the context of that. And so if we're going to move toward personalization, we're dumping out the old notion of a novel study, right? That everyone's reading Moby Dick. No, actually, I don't have to. I can read my own novel. I get to go choose that,
Right.
and that's where we want to get to.
And even with all the
Yeah,
students,
guys, I want to also have Teresa unmuted because she had a whole comment here, and I'd like to have her also speak. Not to cut you off, Steve, but
no
I want
problem.
to have Teresa too.
Yeah, I agree with what's being said. The round robin style of reading the same story is so gone, and you can have your reading circles with individual books of their own choice and still come up with the same themes, the same ideas, the same context. But then that allowing different books and stories to come along would or might entice some of the other kids to read a new book that they had no idea was out there, or maybe would not have chosen it. But I do feel it is very, very difficult to do this online because our teachers are struggling so much to try and entertain the kids online and engage them, and to find the different programs and the different technology that are coming up to try. That's been kind of enticing. Oh, this game will help them with their multiplication or their division or their reading. But is it teacher friendly? Is it finding the facts that need to push that child further along? Working at their own pace, yes, absolutely. That's the way we need to go. We're not all built the same. We're not all going to be on the same page. So that I put quite a little half a book in there, a good paragraph, but I just trying to comment as I was listening.
We'll have a comprehension. We'll have a comprehension test on that voluminous comment. Thank you for that. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the point that I want to make is that what you're saying is that a lot of your teachers are in that moment of discovering what software can do, and that alone takes up all their evenings and weekends. It's caused divorce all over the place, and we're just in that moment. It's just very awkward.
It is, and I don't really struggle, but I just empathize with them so much because I've had many of them come to my office when we are working in the building together, just in tears. I can't do this anymore. I've got no time for myself. I feel like I'm drowning. And what they're trying to do is find new programs or new engagement styles that will help their students, and they're drowning themselves trying to figure one out. We have found a couple of them that are fun to use and engaging, but they're not. They're more like Prodigy and Khan Academy and Freckle. Just the little programs that'll help the kids practice.
And so that's awesome that you're saying that because immediately I go back to that sophistication scale, and so the lower engagement resources are going to be lower on that sophistication scale, and even though it might not be the Word doc level, being mindful and knowing what the characteristics are is important, because then as your learning designers, as your teachers are designing that experience, they're using things that are automatically higher engagement.
Right.
And I think that the concept of being the entertainer speaks directly to a teacher's need to be in front of the students in order for them to engage, except that if we look at our most artful teachers, they don't need to do that. They're probably, there's no front of the room for those teachers. They're out in the room. When you walk into their classroom, and as a principal, I loved doing this because my best teachers, I could walk in and it took me a while to find them because they're out there with the kids, right? They're sitting down at a small table, they're doing the thing, they're getting to know their eyes on eyes, and they're creating the relationships. They're not up doing a tap dance.
Right.
Not. And yet we do have teachers who believe that they have to be tap dancing and in costume and whatevering on their Zoom meeting. And that's ridiculous, right? Well, if you have to resort to a costume, then there's something else amiss, right? Then your design is not really working because all of a sudden you're forced to put on a wig and whatever. And you're
Although once in a while that might be fun, right?
Well, for sure, yeah. But I mean, if that's if you're counting on that, I mean, your entertainment value as Ronald McDonald is infinitely less than anything they might be scrolling through on YouTube at the same time. And so, sorry.
Yeah, it's just a thing. Well, listen, we're gonna have a little break here now and pull Lightspeed in. I want them to share with us before we move over to John Ahrens and Dan Morris for the final panel. This has been a great conversation. You did a great job, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. It's fun.
Yeah, this is awesome. And I think so many people need to just learn the way that this is what you walk them through, to think with. What is the heavy lift that you could be expecting technology to do for you rather than crying in Teresa's office?
Right. Yeah. Don't go crying in Teresa's office, please. Call me first.
Yeah. It's okay, though. Sometimes they need like a virtual hug where we go like this. We're hugging.
For sure. Can do.
But it's really true. Okay. So good. So I think we have a video to play. Or we're going to show a video. And then Lightspeed, I'm like super into these guys because people are trying to do simultaneous teaching with kids 30 feet away behind plexiglass. I don't know how they're doing it without these guys. So let's play that video and then drag Pat in to make some comments.
Young children spend 75% of their school day involved in listening activities and need to receive 90 to 100% of information via the spoken word to understand the full meaning. But there are numerous barriers standing in the way of that critical intelligibility, and unfortunately, they can't get fill in the blanks when things are missed. In students' environments, distance, directionality, and ambient noise all play a role. Speech gets quieter over distance, dropping in volume significantly as it makes its way toward the back of the room. Further, when teachers face away from their students, the sound level can be cut in half. Distracting ambient noise can also drown out speech, leaving students and teachers straining to effectively communicate. And simply increasing the volume of speech itself is often not enough. As loudness increases and teachers try to reach the entire room, students might be able to hear what's being said, but they may still struggle to understand it. For example, clarity is critical to the understanding of soft consonants, such as p, h, t, k, s, and more. The recent COVID-19 pandemic has added additional challenges to the listening environment, such as greater distance between students and teachers, masks and other facial coverings, and protective barriers on desks. With instructional audio, you can overcome these challenges. By leveraging a microphone with either a portable or installed speaker solution, you can ensure the teacher's voice achieves even coverage, regardless of distance, directionality, and ambient noise. And with an easy, tap-to-talk microphone, student voices are clearly heard by both their teachers and peers. Instructional audio provides a clear way to hear the human voice and a pathway to elevating the learning and understanding of students in the modern classroom. To learn more, contact Lightspeed today.
Okay, so before we drag John Ahrens into the fray, hey, Pat, can you introduce yourself?
Again, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. We see you on the video with the
Hey.
fabulous. Is that Arizona behind you? Super awesome.
You know, I can't tell you where it's at. It's a secret spot.
Okay, cool. Well, we love your technology. Everybody needs it. How are you doing?
We're doing great. Things are really busy. Thank you, LeiLani. And I just want to add to the video, we really do three things. We drive access to the instruction. We amplify the experience and make every word fully heard and intelligible, which is a big distinction, to every learner in the learning space. So we make every person able to hear what's being said. And as you rightly said, LeiLani, we could be right next to each other, or we could be 30 or 40 or more feet away from someone, and you've got to have a microphone and some type of sound system in order to make that instruction heard throughout the learning environment. There's just no other way to do it. And I'm with a lot of teachers in the last several weeks and months. They're really struggling. I was with one here in Colorado, and they were not only wearing an N95 mask, they were also wearing a shield. And I was literally 2 or 3 feet away and could barely hear what was being said. And lastly, we boost the student performance and the educational outcomes we're all seeking and wanting to do. And these conversations are all wrapped around that. We want our kids and our teachers to do well and succeed and excel. And a microphone from Lightspeed can really help. So thank you all.
Yeah, and I just want to mention, Patrick, it's not only a lanyard that goes around the neck of the teacher, but there's those little remote boxes.
That's right.
That students can hold.
Right.
And that's their mic.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's called the Activate system. We actually can enable the teachers to assess what's going on around their room from pods of kids with that little device you're talking about, which is both a microphone and a speaker. So they can hear and access, and they can move from pod to pod to be able to hear what's being said throughout their learning space, because we know when a teacher walks up to a group of kids, they change. They stop doing something or they start doing something. Well, this enables the teacher to quietly assess and see and hear what's going on from anywhere in the space, which could also be in a outside the room. So they could be in a hallway or something like that. So we can literally go through walls and hear it. I know it gets a little bit big brother, but in the right application, it's a really powerful and helpful tool.
Yeah.
Yep.
I hope you guys are talking to all the Atlanta districts, because man, they're all trying to simul-teach.
Right. Really
Social
tough.
distance kids in front of them and on video. And it's like,
Really tough. And
Yeah,
we're
'cause
all
if
even
the
seeing
teacher
this a little
walks
bit
off camera,
today.
you can't hear them unless there's that, unless there's amplification.
That's right. We're hearing it today. If I'm seated right in front of my computer all day long, I may not need a microphone. But if I'm walking around the room and trying to teach remotely and hybrid and in-class kids, there's no way to do it. I don't know how they're doing it. And we're seeing some of the stress coming out in the teachers through that process. So we can help greatly. So thank you.
Yeah. Lisa from Denver Public this morning was saying they have to remain seated. Wow.
Yep.
Anyway, I got to get off that, but
Yep.
thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.